Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update extra video where I give you the juicy nuggets to get your teeth into surrounding this war in Ukraine, this horrible war. I don't want to sound so upbeat. It's a terrible conflict, but here is some extra information that will give you contextual understanding and information on that conflict. Where should we start? Well, let's start with some statues of Lenin. So an unpleasant sight reported in occupied Melitopol today. It's not clear from this single photo, but locals say a Lenin monument has been erected. Like the signpost in Donetsk I posted yesterday, it won't last long, says Tim White. Well, actually, the signpost from yesterday is upgrade works in progress in occupied Donetsk. Earlier today, in the city centre, they unveiled a signpost saying to Russia 0 kilometers. The implication being obviously that that is Russia. By the evening, it had disappeared. So it's interesting sort of partisan activity in Donetsk city and hopefully in Melitopol as well. Just for those who don't know, Melitopol is here and Donetsk is here. So that the statue is in Melitopol, the sign was in Donetsk. Okay, second nugget. This is the sort of the best Russian tank there is. There's talk about this prototype T-14 Armata, but this is the T-90M, basically their best tank in service with the Ukrainian armed forces. This is really great for the Ukrainians. Oh, I can't get the sound sorted. I do apologise. Bit of messing around with the sound there. But that is a T-90M tank. Ukrainians having that in their hands is great. It's also a PR win for them, but useful for their upgrading their capabilities and degrading the Russian capabilities. Those T-90 tanks, you're now starting to see them get lost with a greater frequency than previously in the conflict. Okay, new aid package from US announced. US doing Ukraine proud. New $400 million aid package to refurbish Hawk air missile system, defense missiles. I talked to you about those. I showed you what they are. It's interesting to see they're going to refurbish. I said that these have been given by Spain, at least, and I think possibly maybe someone else. But Spain is certainly giving some Hawks, and there are a lot of these in storage in the US. Well, their aid package is to upgrade those, or refurbish them to make sure that they are usable, operational, since they've been in storage, and ideally send them across to Ukraine. So that's really great. 45 refurbished T-72B tanks, 1,100 Phoenix Ghost tanks. So these aren't from the US, but the US are paying for them to be refurbished. I think there are some coming from the Netherlands and some from somewhere else. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. 1,100 Phoenix Ghost tactical unmanned aerial systems. We don't really know about these. We've heard about them earlier on in the conflict, and supposedly some of them went to Ukraine, but not really seen any of them in action, so I don't know much about that. 40 armored riverine boats. Interesting. To refurbish 250 M1117 armored artillery vehicles. And so on and so forth. So lots of stuff happening: tactical secure communication systems and surveillance systems, funding for training, maintenance, and sustainment. Lots of information in there, and that is really good news that the Americans are continuing to show such huge support. So the question then becomes, who's showing the most support? And when America supplies a bunch of stuff, does it show them to be clearly the best? Or the most helpful, if you see what I mean. Of course, this is confused. So the analogy is, if someone who has hardly any money at all, no money, has £10 to their name, comes and gives you £1, and a billionaire comes to give you £1,000, who's the most generous? Well, the billionaire giving you way more, £1,000. Well, what's the percentage of their worth? Well, 10% for the poor person, and the billionaire, 1,000 out of a billion is 0.00 whatever percent. The idea is, yes, America is fantastic, and I'm not decrying their support at all here, but it's very important to get it into context. So how much do they have compared to how much are they giving away? And this is a really interesting infographic that is almost there's almost too much information in here for me to impart with you, so you have to just go and check this out yourself. But when you look at, say, tanks, the US is given no tanks; they have 6,209. The Polish are given 270 tanks, of which they have 808. Um, and the who is it? The Czechs have given, what is it, around 50 odd tanks, and they've got 120, so almost 42% of their tanks. When it comes to armored vehicles, so your infantry fighting vehicles and other sorts of vehicles, MRAPs and whatnot. America's provided 700, which is fantastic, but they have 87,620. So that equates to 0.8% of what they have. The UK has provided 120, and that is 4% of what they have. Um, France 60, that out of 4,593 is 1.3%. And so we look at the percentage. You look at Denmark, 54 they provided, but they only have 508, so that equates to 11% of their stuff. Portugal, 5%, and so on and so forth. 20% for Lithuania, who have provided 55 out of 280. So the question there is who's the most generous? Well, these guys, they've given 700, or these guys, they've given 20%. And of course, they're both generous, and this is great. I'm not trying to play one off against the other. If America weren't doing what they're doing, Ukraine would be in all sorts of trouble. So it's hugely important, but it's about getting a perspective, an accurate perspective of what's going on. So artillery, America's provided 216 pieces. That's 4.8%. Poland 70 pieces, which is 12%. Czech Republic 60 pieces, which is 40%. So on and so forth. And then you've got aeroplanes, so aviation and air defense. So throwing in quite a few different things there. Germany 21%. Of what they have. America 0.5%. So at 40% from Latvia. So that's 4 out of 10. So people have different amounts of capability themselves, or capacity, and the percentage is a really useful way of looking at it. But obviously, you also need real terms as well, because you could say, "Oh, well done, Latvia. That is really good." Giving 40% of your stuff away, but that does only equate to 4. So actually, as far as a big picture is concerned, that's not very much. So yes, they are giving a lot of themselves. But if you want a picture of actually what the Ukrainian needs, well, you absolutely have to factor in America's generosity in giving 28 pieces of kit, and Germany 34. So on and so forth. Denmark here, 75, given 0%. But then what else have they given? Because it's not just about this; it's about all the other stuff as well. So let's have a little bit of a look at the thread that talks about this, because it is interesting stuff. So, as this guy, Volodymyr Dachenko, points out, NATO has transferred 1.4 to 3.6% of its heavy weapons systems to Ukraine. The highest percentage is for artillery, about 3.6%. So we go back up to this picture. They give the NATO totals on the right there, and there are obviously non-NATO forces, but as a percentage of what NATO has. This is the percentages talking there. So the highest percentage of stuff that NATO countries has given is in terms of artillery. The need for artillery remains most acute because Ukraine has minimal stocks of shells, we'll come on to that, for Soviet artillery systems of 122 and 152 millimeter caliber. The transition to NATO artillery began in April, and in half a year, Ukraine received about 400 artillery systems of 105 and 155 millimeter caliber. Now, this is where I'm going to bring this into play. Ukraine has established a production of artillery shells of caliber 122 mm and 152 mm. Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Alexei Reznikov, has said. So this is fascinating. Ukraine are building Soviet era shells for their Soviet era and Russian artillery pieces, non-NATO pieces. So they've used up the stocks in Eastern Europe and their own stocks, and they are now building that. And it's really interesting that they are announcing this publicly, because for me, I don't know why they do this sometimes. I do understand in other times, but here it's like they are announcing to Russia that we have now got a target for you to come and hit, because you can bet your bottom dollar that, well, I presume they're making these in Ukraine, that the Russian would want to, this would be target number one for a Russian wanting to hit. With sort of the Iranian drones and whatnot. The US transferred the most systems, about 200 units, but this country also has the largest reserves. This is what I was talking about, of artillery among NATO countries. The total number of artillery in the US arsenal and stores is 1,523 self-propelled guns, 2,151 howitzers, 800 HIMARS, M270, and ATACMS. The Czech Republic and Great Britain became the most generous suppliers of artillery. The Czech Republic transferred about 40% of its artillery systems to Ukraine, and Great Britain 25%. So again, it depends what you define as most generous, but in percentage terms, that is Czech Republic and Great Britain. NATO countries transferred about 1.4% of their armored vehicles to Ukraine. Here too, the largest supplier is the US, more than 1,140 units. But in relation to stockpile of weapons, this is 0.8% of all armored vehicles that the United States has, as I pointed out. The Czech Republic appears to be Ukraine's most loyal ally in supplying its weapons. She transferred 30 to 40% of all the systems she had. It is worth paying attention to how the role of Germany in the supply of weapons has changed, and I've talked about this. At the beginning of the war, this country refused to supply heavy equipment. Now its role is quite high in the and Germany transfers a large part of what it has. However, among NATO members, not all countries are in a hurry to transfer heavy weapons. For example, the most armed NATO countries include Turkey, Greece, and Romania. I did not include the weapons that Turkey sells to Ukraine here, because the infographic is all about aid. And this is very interesting. So there's also, and some of those countries as well have sold a bunch of stuff to Ukraine. Greece is one of the largest operators of armored vehicles and artillery, more than 1,200 tanks and 1,200 artillery systems. Moreover, these are the systems that other countries transfer to Ukraine: the M109 Panzer Howitzer 2000 self-propelled guns, RM70 and M270. Greece delayed the delivery of 40 BMP-1, so those are really old infantry fighting vehicles, for 4 months. I mean, that's from the 60s. They will have been upgraded a little bit, but you get my point. For 4 months, because it insisted that Germany should first supply Greece with the Marder IFV in order not to weaken the defense capability of its army. At the time, Greece had more than 1,800 IFV M113s. Against a background of which 40 old BMP-1 are unlikely to affect the country's defense capability. In other words, Greece, step up. Properly step up. Romania is the largest operator of MLRS M270 in Europe, 54 systems, but none was supplied to Ukraine. In general, this country has so far limited itself to supplies of ammunition and small arms. And Romania will be one of the first on the firing line if Ukraine falls, if you're thinking that way. Deliveries of heavy weapons are not the only military aid that Ukraine receives. Western allies also give UA shells, ammunition, portable systems, small arms, military uniforms, and more. This is why it's really important to understand that some of those countries that might look like they are stingy, if they are giving absolutely loads of this, then that's really, really important. There's no point having these artillery pieces and no shells to fire. Okay, so you can look at a country that supplies loads of artillery pieces and go, well, they're way more generous than this country that has zero supplied. But if that other country is supplying all the shells, then actually, you need to see the whole picture. But now Western heavy weapons systems are gaining more and more importance on the battlefield. They're gradually replacing damaged and worn out Soviet equipment that cannot withstand intense, prolonged battles. There's some argument to say things like the Panzer Howitzer 2000 can't sustain those kind of battles either, and having to be repaired quite a bit. Ukraine's transition to NATO arms in this war is inevitable, but NATO itself have to look more and more at its stocks and plan the new orders for the production of modern weapons. After all, this war showed that only force can guarantee peace. And he talks about the data that he's got from Oryx. So that's a really interesting infographic and set or a bunch of information. Okay, so the next thing is this, and the tragedy of war isn't just a human one, right? It's not just about humans dying. It's about the environment as well that's getting ravaged, and of course the importance of the environment to human well-being, clean water, biodiversity, food production, air quality, all this kind of stuff affected by war. Okay, here the Russians blew up 2 more ships in Kubyshev. So this is Kherson city area. they're blowing up ships to stop the Ukrainians being able to use those ships to cross the river, the Dnipro. They had fuel, oil, and fuel, which are now pouring into the Dnipro, causing ecological problems. And this is the real shame to what they are doing. It is not just affecting humans, but affecting the ecosystem in the surrounding area. So that is just something to take note of. Here, the Russian sources say that Russian forces, God, it almost sounds like Rage Against the Machine or something, used up almost all Iranian kamikaze drones from the first batch, but also state that the second batch of 1,500 to 2,400 drones is already being delivered by Iran. And there are, like, I don't know on this thread, but there are pictures that are floating around now of Iranian aircraft landing in Moscow. So we're pretty sure that those drones are being delivered to Russia right now. A bit of a worry. We have seen far fewer drones being used over the last week, so it's almost certain that the Russians are running low on them, because I'm sure they'd be using them if they had plenty in their stocks. Speaking of which, North Korea has started sending trains to Russia for the first time in several years. This is massively important. Okay, so although many have claimed that Russia have just endless supplies of ammunition, I think the amount of damage the HIMARS have done, and probably the corrosion of shells and deterioration of their stocks in terms of the way they keep them, and the amount that they have used, they probably are running low on ammunition. So North Korea started sending, if they weren't running low, they wouldn't be asking North Korea for ammunition and shells that we know that they have. North Korea started sending trains to Russia for the first time in several years. The DPRK is probably secretly supplying the Russian Federation with shells and ammunition for the war in Ukraine. What is worrying here, and I've not heard anyone talk about this, this is my pure speculation. North Korea is kind of like a vassal state of China. China's saying we're not helping Ukraine, but if they are allowing trains to go from North Korea, and are arguably kind of supporting North Korea in this, are they even adding to the supply that are going secretly, as adding secretly to the supply that is going from North Korea to Russia? What's China's part in this is my question there. And is this a clandestine way that China can perhaps help North Korea? Now, I've got no evidence of that. It's worth considering. If we look at sort of the map of North Korea, oops, if I can actually spell it correctly. Let's have a look at the map here. So North Korea is here, and of course goes on to China. So before it gets to Russia, there is a connection, or I don't know whether there's rail connection though, through North Korea to Russia there. So that's interesting. But either way, I wonder whether China has some fingerprints on that, but no evidence of that. It's just my pure speculation. This is the claim that a Ukrainian Gurza M class armored gunboat was damaged by a Russian Lancet loitering munition. There's a big problem with this. Has done the rounds. There's a big problem with this, and the problem is that wasn't really aware they were using these gunboats. And would a gunboat be sitting in an active war zone on the flat seas, just sitting there doing nothing? Bilge pumps are working, so that is something, I guess. But you've got two bits of drone footage, one from the Lancet, another from the spotter drone that's right overhead. And that gunboat seems to not know anything about these two approaching drones. It's just sitting there, and it gets blown up. So is this just for show? Is this a captured gunboat that's being used here for some reason by the Russians? And in fact, you start looking at the tweets about this, and everyone has their theory on whether it was a genuine Ukrainian one or not. We know that these sort of boats were captured in the Azov Sea, 4 now in the Black Sea. So who knows? Who knows? There are loads of theories kicking around about that. To me, that looks really suspect. Okay, Andrew Perpetua shows this photo. Good thing he's wearing goggles. I have been seeing so many Ukrainian fighters, soldiers wearing ski masks and goggles like this, and you're thinking, interesting that they are wearing that. I presume they're ski masks. There might be ones made specifically for the military. I don't know, but it seems to me that a lot of them are wearing ski masks or similar. Here is an example of why that could be useful. Eye protection. I know when I wear glasses, right? If I go and do streaming outside, I don't wear protective goggles, but I've had bits of stuff hit my glasses before, and you're thinking, goodness, lucky I was wearing that. That could have gone right in my eye. When you're talking about shrapnel from shells, it's slightly different from a bit of garden trimming in the south of England. Where you're talking stuff flying all over the shop, and eye protection has got to be super, super important. And here, obviously, it is. Where next? Okay, so the talking about those sort of Lancets, I should have had this next to the one with the gunboat, but here is two Ukrainian self-propelled howitzers were destroyed by Russian Lancet loitering munitions in the south, and what was it? Yeah, it was. So these are the Ukrainian guns firing, and then sort of being hit, and I wanted to show you something that I have seen much less of with uh, the Russian piece units being hit compared to these. So that is the loitering munition, the Lancet drone, which seems to be sort of becoming a little bit more prevalent than it was before. Now, what you can see from the right here are people running to the vehicle. Is this a meaningful difference between the Ukrainians and the Russians? Because I've seen a couple of instances where Ukrainian vehicles have been hit and Ukrainian, uh, fighting comrades are running back to the vehicle to help people out of it rather than just run straight away. Here you see them running. This thing could fundamentally explode. That's just a replay of the initial explosion. But they run to the vehicle to help out people who might be injured inside. And here we have another a loitering munition hit of another SPG. And as it comes in, you've got those guys there, and you see them get thrown to the side. They actually see the munition, so they fall. But then what do? So this guy's down, but he's not out. They run back to look. There are guys getting out. That they run to this SPG to help their injured friends, and then get out there, get out of Dodge because that bad boy's going to explode. But that's two examples, two from two. So this is a Russian, essentially propaganda or whatever Russian information video, as you can tell, saying, "Hey, look how good we are! The Lancets have hit these two SPGs." But in both cases, Ukrainian soldiers ran to the vehicles to help out injured people, and I find that fascinating. What's our next port of call? We're going to have a look at this. Elon Musk, good old Elon Musk, who love him or hate him. Some of you will, of course, like him. Some of you will not. He's quite controversial at the moment with regard to Twitter. He's literally just sacked half of Twitter, which is interesting because I do a lot of work through Twitter, obviously gathering all my information. And a lot of people are not happy about that. So he's been accused of switching off 1,300 Starlink terminals in Ukraine's front line last week. This has happened before. This has caused some problems in Kherson, where they were using this, and might have been a reason why Ukraine stalled initially in Kherson on their counterattack, as they literally had no or apparently might not have had communications to carry on their attack because Elon Musk turned off Starlink. Well, this has happened again. The company wants a US government to pay the bill. CNN quotes a number of Ukraine's military saying they were disconnected due to lack of funding. So the details here obviously might be that Starlink genuinely have good reason to turn that off, because they need money to run that. But the repercussions are obviously could end in literally people dying. So, there you go. Uh, as CNN report here, Ukraine's fears that its troops may lose access to Elon Musk's crucial Starlink internet service deepened in the past week after 1,300 of the military satellite units went offline, according to two sources familiar with the outage. The small, easy-to-use satellite dishes made by Musk's private rocket company SpaceX have been universally hailed as a game-changing source of communication for Ukraine's military, allowing it to fight and stay online even as cellular phone and internet networks have been destroyed in its war with Russia. But concerns have risen recently over the dependability of SpaceX after discussions about funding were revealed and outages were reported near the front lines. CNN first reported that SpaceX sent a letter in September to the Pentagon claiming it had spent almost $100 million funding Starlink in Ukraine, and it could no longer continue to do so. The letter requested that the Defense Department take over more of the funding for Ukraine's military, which it calculated would run tens of millions of dollars a month. Days after CNN report, Musk appeared to reverse course, claiming the SpaceX had withdrawn the request. The hell with it, Musk tweeted. We'll just keep funding Ukraine government for free. Obviously, that's a bit of passive-aggressive Elon Musk there. But, there's a point that where does the money come from? This is a private company. Or at least, it's not a government agency. Negotiations between SpaceX and the Defense Department continued despite Musk's claim that SpaceX withdrew its request, according to a senior defense official. So negotiations are underway, and it's all pretty controversial. And before the terminals went completely dark, Ukraine's Ministry of Defense made a request in early October to their British counterparts to pick up the $3.25 million monthly bill. The batch of terminals were also rotated out as concerns grew that the service could be turned off in order to minimize the impact, the source said. So, the Ukraine needs someone to pay for it. Who it is doesn't really matter to them, but of course it matters to those countries who are shelling out quite a lot of money for SpaceX to provide those services. It's all quite intricate and a bit of a problem for Ukraine going forward. Anyway, there you go. Those are my nuggets for today. I hope that has been of interest to you. Please comment down below, like, subscribe, share, do all that stuff. And there are many ways to support my channel, but just watching it is support enough. But if you are able and willing, there is Buy Me a Coffee, PayPal, and you can pop along to uasupporter.com/ATP, and you can get some mouse pads. If you like a good mouse pad, here you can buy one to show your support for Ukraine. Lots of designs there, and my channel gets a little bit of commission for anything bought there. So thank you to anyone who has done that. Anyway, toodle pips, and I will see y'all tomorrow for tomorrow's update videos. Whoop.